Hey everybody, it's Lynn Hayes. Welcome back to my channel. I wanted to talk this week about the astrology of the week that's coming up from June 1st to June 8th, 2020. But there are some other things also that I'd like to talk about. One is the sort of violence that we're seeing out in the world, some issues about the pandemic I'd like to discuss briefly. And there's an eclipse that's coming up next week that I think is going to have an important role to play in what's happening here with the astrology of the time. So the first thing that I'd like to say is I want to talk about the conjunction from Jupiter to Pluto. So I wrote an article about this when this aspect first came together on April 1st. So I'll post a link to that in the description box. But Jupiter was the king of the gods, you might remember from your Roman mythology. Jupiter in the birth chart shows where we feel optimistic, where we are expansive, where we find a way to have meaning in our lives. It also rules theology and religion and publishing and the sharing of ideas on a broad scale. So it also has a lot to do with ideology. And when Jupiter is conjunct Pluto, the planet of death and rebirth, sometimes we see some extreme events that have to do with ideology. And we're certainly seeing that right now at the moment. There's a lot of conflict in the world. Of course, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. There's a lot of restrictions about what we can and cannot do. Many of us are still in quarantine. Some of us are trying to get out of quarantine. There's a lot of political issues around that and oppression and how much freedom we should have. And all of that gets much more intense when Jupiter is conjunct Pluto. So it first hit April 4th. That's when there started to be a lot of suspicion about, was this virus even true, or was it a scam or some sort of conspiracy? So we have the second phase of that, June 30th. So that's a month away, but the two planets are 2 degrees apart, and they're not going to really separate this month. They're both moving very slowly because they are both retrograde. So currently we have, I think, 4 planets retrograde. Mercury will turn retrograde later in the month. Then we'll have 5. And as you might remember, if you've seen other videos or read other articles, but in the middle of the summer, we will have up to 7 planets retrograde. So really, we're all on pause. This is a time when there's a lot of sort of regurgitation of past events. We're going to often this summer have this experience of, I can't believe we're here again, which is how I felt this morning reading the news, over the past few days. I can't believe we're here again. So, when is that going to end? I don't know. What's wrong with human beings is my main question. But we're not going to answer that question now. So now we're going to talk about the astrology for the week. But I did want to sort of mention the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. Now, another thing to mention about the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction is Saturn, which has moved into Aquarius, is going to move back into Capricorn. And Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto are traveling very close, certainly within 5 degrees and mostly less for the rest of the year. So, there's a lot of pressure is really what's happening, a lot of pressure and a need for release. So what's going to facilitate that release, but not in a way that's going to be particularly comfortable or easy, is going to be Mars. So Mars is the planet of aggression, assertiveness. Mars gets a bad rap in traditional astrology. They call it a malefic, and certainly, Mars is not always comfortable. It creates stress. It can cause wars, but it also is our motivation. I usually will say that If we didn't have Mars, we would never get out of bed in the morning. Mars is the planet that says, you know, I really want to do this. It inspires us, it motivates us to action. And that's important in our life, and Mars has a role to play. So Mars is going to move into Aries at the end of June, where it's the strongest. I'm sure I'll be talking a lot about this as time goes on. But while Mars is in retrograde, or while Mars is in Aries, it's going to retrograde. And so because of that, it's going to stay in Aries for a very long time. It will stay in Aries until January of 2021. So that's essentially 6 months in Aries, or 5 months, sorry. But that's a long time, especially when Mars is going to be in challenging aspects to Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto throughout this period. So Mars is going to trigger this revolt. I don't want to do what you say. You know, if you have children, you're going to see that in your own home. And certainly we're going to see that out in the world. And it's hard to say how that's going to play out with this pandemic situation. But I think, you know, the problem with Mars and with anger and aggression is that when you meet anger and aggression with more anger and aggression, it just blows everything up. So we don't want to ignore the anger and aggression. We don't want to deny it. We need to look at it. We need to face it. But then we need to breathe, and we need to see what we can do to change it. We can't respond with anger. We can, but it will virtually have no effect except to blow ourselves up. Now, what's going to intensify this even more? There's a concept that astrologer Richard Noley has coined called the Mars max cycle. Richard is the astrologer who also coined the term supermoon, which is now out there in the mainstream. But the Mars max cycle is when Mars in the sky is closest to Earth. That's called the perigee cycle. And according to Richard, the Mars max cycle is between June 6th of this year and February 1st. Richard says that during this phase, we are more susceptible to fires, crashes, clashes, and explosions. So, you know, I'm not telling you all this to try to be a doom and gloom prophesizer, but I think it's really important to know something about what's coming. I'm sure I've said this before, but I live in North Carolina. We have a lot of hurricanes. So, you know, it's sort of like when a hurricane comes, if I just went la, 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 I don't want to hear about the hurricane. I just want to do whatever I want to do, and I'm going to pretend there won't be a hurricane. So sometimes the hurricanes don't come, and then people have prepared and it doesn't come. But if you're prepared for anything and ready, that's useful. You know, then we're ready for whatever comes. Maybe it's not as bad as we think it's going to be. And I think it's really important not to be afraid of these cycles. I have a lot of people calling me all the time, you know, what is this going to mean for me? I heard that everything is going to just blow up. And, you know, it may not be that difficult for you, but knowing something about the energies, I think, is important. So while we're on the subject of Mars, I do want to talk about the eclipse that's coming up on June 5th. So eclipses happen astrologically and astronomically. An eclipse occurs when a lunar event, which we call lunation, which is either a new moon or a full moon, when a lunation is within 14 degrees of the lunar nodes, the nodes of the moon. And that's significant astrologically because the nodes of the moon symbolize the past and the future. It's our direction from the south node, which is the past, to the north node, which is where we're headed. So because of this, eclipses have an effect that can feel sort of karmic. There can be a sense of meeting our destiny. Can often, especially with the solar eclipses, it's a lunar eclipse, where we tend to have sort of an eruption of emotions. With the solar eclipse, there can be an unmasking of who we really are. With a lunar eclipse, it can be sort of an exposure of something that was a secret, exposure of something that we held very close to our heart. But in any case, eclipses are not, people are often scared of eclipses, and they're very rarely do they really create a lot of problems, except we do tend to see, earthquakes and floods and things like that, because the earth is very affected by these energies. But on a personal level, it could be that something is kind of broken out and we could be freed of something that has caused us to feel trapped. And this is especially true for this particular eclipse because our friend Mars, which is in Pisces right now, where it's not very effective. Mars in Pisces can be sort of a grumbler, and I'm not happy, but I can't really say anything about it. But Mars is in a challenging square to both the sun and moon in this eclipse. So because of this, there could be kind of an eruption of some kind. I'm anticipating that all of this stress that's in the world right now could come to some sort of peak around this time. Eclipse energies typically last for a few days before and a few days afterwards. There are some astrologers who say that the effects last for 6 months on either side. I haven't really seen that to be the case. But in any case, it's going to be a fairly intense week. So when we have all of this Mars energy, all this intensity, eclipse, it's really helpful to find a balance internally. Anytime there's a lot of Mars energy, physical activity is really helpful. I have so many clients right now that are stuck in their apartments in a city. I think a lot of towns and cities are starting to open now, but it may not be completely safe to just be able to, feel free and go out and take a walk in the park or whatever. But it's really important right now to be somewhat active outside where there is nature, where we can feel grounded, where we can feel connected to some kind of flow. And certainly with all of these Mars energies, doing, walking, which can be sort of a meditation, Tai Chi, yoga, anything that combines physical activity with the integration of the body, mind, and spirit is going to be very useful. So there are some other planetary things that are happening this week, but they're kind of minor and we may not even notice them. But the most important thing, I think, is as we're in the lead up to this eclipse, we do have an active Venus. So the way that we relate to other people, the way that we treat ourselves, having some way to open up the heart, have an experience from the heart, which is going to be easier on June 2nd and June 3rd, while Venus is active, and then the intense eclipse energy will start. So while we're in the middle of the eclipse and Mars, doing some heart opening exercises, some deep breathing, all of that's going to be really useful. So if you have questions, please be sure to let me know in the comments. I'll try to, give you as much information as I can. There's also, you might find it interesting to visit my Facebook page where I post daily interpretations of what's happening in the skies. So anyway, I hope that's useful. Thank you again for visiting me today, and I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.